Hi again, Risa here, back with another episode of Ask Risa. This is my weekly video series where I discuss some common wedding planning questions and problems, and there are a whole bunch of videos earlier in this series which you can find in a playlist on my YouTube channel, which is under my business name, Risa James Events. The last few weeks I've been doing a sustainability series, and I've been talking all about how to reduce the carbon footprint and improve the sustainability and the earth friendliness of your wedding. 2 weeks ago, I talked about what you can do from a stationery and paper goods standpoint. Last week, I talked about florals and decor and how to cut down on waste there. And this week, I want to talk about your venue and your catering and your beverages. So choosing your venue is one of the biggest decisions that you make when it comes to wedding planning, and it's also one of the first decisions that you make because you can't really confirm your date until you actually have a venue, a place to hold your wedding. So when you're looking for a venue, if you want to lower the carbon footprint of your overall wedding, you want to choose a venue that's close to most of your guests. So if a lot of your guests don't live in the same place that you do, but they live in the same place as each other, maybe consider having your wedding where they are instead of where you are. Because if just you and your fiance have to travel for your wedding, that's a much lower carbon footprint than 100 people traveling from all over the place to get to where you are. And consider car travel as well as airplane travel. So even if everybody lives, maybe in the same state, a state like California where I live is huge. So even if I got married in Sacramento where I live, maybe people have to come from Los Angeles or San Diego or San Francisco. They're all traveling, driving, flying from somewhere else in California. So that's the biggest impact on your carbon footprint is the travel of the people who are coming to your wedding. So when you're looking at venues, keep that in mind, and then also think about how pretty is the venue, because the prettier it is naturally, the less you have to bring in from a floral and decor standpoint to make it look prettier. So maybe if you want to get married outside, you want to look at botanical gardens or some other sort of outdoor venue that has a lot of flowers, a lot of trees, doesn't need a lot to be brought in to make it look nice. If you're looking at indoor venues, newer hotels, they're not very pretty. They have ballrooms, but they're very run-of-the-mill. If you want a pretty ballroom, you're going to need to look for a more historic building, something that was built at least 100 years ago, if not more, because interior design and architecture for things like hotels was much more ornate and elaborate in the previous couple of centuries than in the past few decades. But you can definitely find ballrooms that are gorgeous and don't need a ton of work to make them look pretty, because the less floral and decor work you have to do, the less waste there will be at the end of the wedding. Because as I was talking about last week, what are you going to do with all those flowers at the end of the wedding? They look great for a few hours, but then they're going to die and they're going to have to be thrown out, hopefully composted, but they're still going to die. So the less you have to bring in, the better off you're going to be from a sustainability standpoint. And if you're looking for an actual building to have your wedding in, you can check to see if the building is LEED certified, which is a certification process to assure people that a building meets certain environmentally friendly qualifications. Like it has efficient use of electricity, efficient use of water, heating, cooling, that sort of thing. It's a very long process, and it costs a lot of money both to build a LEED certified building and also to actually get the certification. So buildings are always very proud of it when they have LEED certification. If you can't figure out whether or not a building is LEED certified, it's probably not, because someone will be talking about it either on the website or in the literature or during your venue tour. If it's LEED certified, they will tell you because they want you to know that. But that's something to look out for. So some venues do the catering in-house. You might be in a situation where you're going to be hiring an external caterer. Either way, talk to the catering company or the venue representative about where the food is come from. So you want local, in-season, sustainably grown, responsibly farmed food at your wedding to get the most sustainability out of your overall wedding. Much like with flowers, food that is local doesn't have to travel. cuts down on the carbon footprint. Food that's in season also doesn't have to travel. So if it's summer in the southern hemisphere, they're growing summer vegetables. But if you live in the northern hemisphere and it's winter, those vegetables for your dinner are going to have to come from the southern hemisphere, which means they have to travel, which means they have a larger carbon footprint. So things that are in season also taste better when they're grown locally, because they're things that have to travel, both flowers and produce, are bred and sometimes genetically modified to be hardier so that they can travel. They can withstand the long distances of travel. But there are trade-offs for that. With flowers, they don't smell as good, and with food, it doesn't taste as good. The best food you're ever going to have is food that's grown local to where you live or reasonably close and in the season when it's optimal for that fruit. Think about tomatoes. Tomatoes taste amazing in North America in July and August because they are in season and they are super fresh. You have a tomato in December, it does not taste good. Like, I don't know if you've ever eaten a tomato in December, but they're mealy. They're kind of gross because they've come from somewhere far away. They've traveled a long distance and they're just not as flavorful. So you want to look for locally grown in-season food as much as you can. Something else to talk to your caterer about is what's going to happen with the leftover food. We try not to have a ton of leftover food. We try to balance that pretty carefully, but you never want to run out of food at a wedding. So there usually is some leftover food. Sometimes we package it up and give it to the family to take home, but you can also talk to your caterer about maybe donating it to a food bank. Just whatever you do, make sure it's not being thrown away. Obviously, that's the most wasteful because it's just going to end up probably in a landfill somewhere. It might be composted depending on where you live, but throwing away the leftover food is your worst option from a sustainability standpoint. So donating it would be far better. Also, find out about recycling bins and whether those are going to be available at the venue, so that if there is anything that needs to be tossed out that's recyclable, guests, especially once they start drinking, they're not great at making the decision between, oh, is this trash or is this recycling? But, at least if the bins are there, you stand a greater chance of getting things to be recycled. Also, when it comes to like plates, glasses, silverware, always rent the real thing. Rent real china, real silverware, and real glasses, because it takes a lot less energy to wash those items and reuse them than it does to make disposables and then deal with disposables in the trash, most of which end up in landfills because they're plastic and they're styrofoam and they're a disaster for the environment. If you absolutely have to have something disposable, just make sure it's compostable, because you can get cups, plates, and flatware that's compostable. That's not a problem. Just whatever you do, don't get plastic forks and plastic plates and plastic cups, because those are terrible for the environment and you're going to generate a ton of waste that way. And then when it comes to your bar and your alcohol, so for wine and liquor, you want to buy larger bottles. A standard bottle of wine is 750 milliliters. A Magnum, which is the next size up, is a 1.5 liter bottle. So it's double the amount of wine. And with alcohol, with liquor, a standard bottle is also 750 milliliters, but the next size up is a 1.75 liter, which is called a handle, generally because the bottles have handles on them. So it's just a little, shorthand for them. So if you buy the larger bottles, then you have fewer bottles at the end of the night to dispose of, recycling, because each one holds more. So then you go through fewer bottles than if you were to buy the normal size bottles. When it comes to beer, kegs are going to be your most sustainable option because those are cleaned and reused. That's why you have to take the keg back to the brewery or the beer distributor or wherever you're getting it, because they're going to reuse that keg. Bottles and cans, at least they're recyclable, that they have that going for them. Cans are a little bit easier because they take up less space, because they can be crushed, and it's actually faster for bartenders to open cans than bottles. Not that that has anything to do with sustainability, but just if you're thinking about it. But from a waste generation perspective, kegs are your best bet because there is really very little waste generated with those, unlike bottles and cans, which you're going to go through a lot of. And when it comes to wine, you can find a winery, there's a lot of them out there, that uses biodynamic practices, organic, sustainable farming practices, and that way you're supporting those wineries and also just overall improving the sustainability of your own wedding. And then my last tip is just about mixed drinks. Everybody knows that we're on an anti-plastic straw kick lately, so paper straws are your friend. They're easy to come by, and you definitely want to make sure either your bartenders already have them to be used or you can supply them to your bartenders. But don't let anybody serve any plastic straws or drink stirrers at your wedding if you want it to stay sustainable. Those are my tips. I will be back next week with one more sustainability video, and it's going to be kind of a catch-all with a whole bunch of different stuff thrown into one video. So if you enjoyed this one, give it a thumbs up and come back and see me next week, same time, same place. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. All right, talk to you next week.